Hi, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
My name is Jade,
And I'm Sharee.
and we are your favorite mother-daughter private investigation duo.
And welcome to another episode of Pretty Guilty.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in again today. And if you're new, welcome.
And if you're back again, welcome back.
English is a little hard for us today, so just bear with
We
me.
are struggling for
Truly. The coffee has not kicked in, even though it's 9 o'clock at night. But that's
yes,
fine.
that's okay. We are here and we're excited to be here to talk about all things.
Bryan Kohberger.
Yeah.
A couple things have happened with the Bryan Kohberger trial that we want to talk about, and we want to rewind a little bit to the Dateline episode that we talked about in our previous episode. There has been some major backlash from that episode coming out, and I think that we spoke about how we felt it was not the right thing this close to trial to do for that episode to be aired out, because Dateline says they obtained exclusive information that only Dateline was able to obtain. So what was the repercussions of that episode coming out?
Well, it was not only information that they were able to obtain, it was also information that they were able to obtain from basically their own sources that were on the inside. Like they had connections to somebody that they weren't supposed to have connections to for this information to be disseminated out. Yeah. And I would like to say that during our podcast, right before this information got released, we really did a deep discussion on why it was not good for this Dateline episode to be out so close, especially to the trial, because it creates a narrative if anybody who's a potential juror, because nobody knows who is going to be the jurors at this point, right? Yeah. So if you are supposed to be a potential juror and you see this Dateline episode, it creates a narrative without fully seeing all of the evidence. And we talked about how I felt that was, well, you and I both collectively felt that it was a concern for Dateline. And then we find out that the
judge is very upset.
The judge is very upset. There's a sequestration order in place that the attorneys, people involved in it, are not allowed to provide any information. Even without a sequestration order, wouldn't you think that that's not appropriate either?
Well, and there's also a gag order
Correct.
As well.
Yes.
And yes, it's not appropriate. We have to remember there's a lot of public speculation. It's become such a spectacle, this case has, right? So many people feel so close, but they also feel so entitled to information that they're not entitled to. But we have to remember that this is the lives of 4 students and their families and victims and people who were affected by this. And so people want information, and I get that. We all want information. However, there is due processes, and in order to keep the integrity of the case for the victims, Kaylee, Xana, Maddie, and Ethan, it's imperative that the law enforcement, attorneys, families, everybody keep as much information, sealed as possible until the trial. And then Dateline comes out and so recklessly does this episode, and mind you, I love Keith Morrison. That's my dog. Okay, I love him. I love Keith. So I was excited for the episode as a viewer and as a, I guess, spectator, if you will. However, understanding the importance of keeping that information sealed, it was a hard watch. It really was.
I remember us watching it, and we both were thinking, this is not good that they're coming out, because the problem is that when you watch this episode, it really is very one-sided, which is a concern, because Bryan Kohberger has the right to be considered innocent until proven guilty, right? And so when we look at this and we look at an episode like the nature of Dateline, they pretty much have put Bryan Kohberger as guilty, practically a death sentence, because that narrative of their show was very one-sided.
And mind you, we're not Bryan Kohberger sympathizers here, right? We're not Team Kohberger. That's not what we're saying. This applies to any case.
Right.
This applies to, there are people with even the Karen Reed. Whether you think Karen Reed is guilty or innocent, it was the same thing. There's a ton of information being put out there, and then we have the first trial, of course, but this applies to any case.
The problem is these cases have to be argued on law, and when you have people giving opinions like this or trying to drive a narrative of what they think the public wants to see, then it becomes dangerous, because then we're no longer trying this case on law, we're trying it on the court of public opinion. Absolutely. And I think that is where we run into the problem, number one. And number two, if Bryan Kohberger is found guilty and these things are able to move forward in the fashion that they are, then we have appeal issues. Yeah. And then somebody who is guilty would be released on an appeal because it wasn't handled properly throughout this process, because he does have the right to due process. He does have the right to a fair trial. He does have the right to be proven or innocent until proven guilty. And so when we're not allowing those things to happen, if he were to be found guilty, then he is now going to appeal and could be released.
And has a strong case, unfortunately, when things like this happen.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't happen in a year. That could happen 10 years down the line.
Appeals take so long, so many years. It doesn't happen overnight. But that's not the point. The point is Dateline knows better. I was like, oh, gosh.
It was a rough watch in that sense of thinking of the victims and the justice and how this really puts such a wrench in things. So the judge comes out and essentially is saying that the judge wants to investigate who leaked this information. He wants text messages, he wants emails, he wants any type of correspondence that law enforcement, attorneys, anybody has had with the media to try and figure out who it was that released this information. And he was very, very upset.
In your thought process, I don't want to speculate on who released it because we would be accusing possibly the wrong person. Do you think it was somebody inside, like an attorney, or do you think it was more law enforcement? My thought is that it could be more law enforcement, is what how the judge had stated it when he requested this investigation, right?
I feel as though if the judge really felt like it was counsel, then he would really hone in on that. But the fact that he's saying any investigator, any law enforcement, that's including federal agents, anybody who has handled this case, he wants to know. Yeah. He wants to know if you're the one leaking information. So I think that the judge also feels like it's not necessarily counsel, or it could be counsel with the help of other people. You know, we've seen behind the scenes of cases where the DA has, been dirty, leaked information to media outlets, or has had, information leaked on, essentially giving instructions to have somebody leak the information. So while I'm not saying it's counsel, I don't know who it is, but it could be anybody. And it could be from either side, really. I mean, it didn't make Bryan Kohberger look like a saint here, so I don't believe it was necessarily the defense.
Pretty certain. Devil's advocate, maybe it could be a play to try and get the delay for the continuance.
Absolutely. Who knows? Because that brings us to the next thing. There has been a motion filed by the defense.
Yes, they were asking for a continuance of the trial that's supposed to start on July 30th with the jury selection.
Yeah, opening arguments were supposed to be scheduled for August 11th. Mind you, this is not because of the Dateline episode. The defense has for a while been asking for more time, and the judge hasn't been granting it. The defense has felt like there was a ton of information dumped on them by the prosecution, and they have asked for more time. The judge felt like they have had sufficient time to look over the evidence that they have in the discovery. So the judge has said, no, we're setting a trial date. However, due to the Dateline episode.
Well, and also that book by that James Patterson, it also discusses in this motion. So the motion is 40 pages long, and the defense goes into details on their reasoning for requesting the motion for continuance, being reasons stating in there is, like you had said, that they felt there was a document dump, then they needed more time to review. The judge said you have had ample time. So then on top of that, they said because this is a death penalty case, then we are allowed more time, extensive time, I should say, to create a history of Bryan Kohberger. What they're doing is they're trying to put together mitigating factors because they want, obviously, if he were to be found guilty during the sentencing phase, for him to get life in prison and not the death penalty. So they want an extensive history. They want experts. And they're saying that he does have that right to due process. They've listed cases of precedent where a defendant has been found guilty, was supposed to be sentenced to life, but mitigating factors sentenced them to life in prison. So those were a lot of the reasons that they put in there. And then at the bottom, they said, oh, and Dateline. And then this James Patterson wrote this book about the Idaho 4 murders that's supposed to come out 16 days before the trial begins.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And I mean, what do you think about the book?
I don't think the book is the problem. I think that the book can be delayed 2 months while we have a trial. It goes back to just like the Dateline. Well, I don't think this guy has as much reach as Keith Morrison does. Anything can taint a juror. Anything can be used to sway the jury, a potential juror, one way or another. However, I don't think that much media that is being put out is pro Kohberger. So, I mean, I don't know that we really have to worry about Kohberger walking free at this point with as much information that's been put out for anti-Kohberger. However, it doesn't matter. Again, it goes really back to principle of making sure that there's no appeals that can be made, that make sure that this is a really due process for the victims. That's the main thing. And I feel as though the timing of putting a book of that nature out 16 days before the trial is making a statement. And it feels... A, it feels a little bit icky, and B, a book like this is a bit different than reporting on certain things that are happening. I mean, this is a deep dive into evidence that he's saying comes to the conclusion of Kohberger doing it. You know, all of the evidence is in, and now you're the jury is essentially what it's saying. So he's saying that's it. Everything that's in this book is what happened, and that's it.
And I think that's the trouble with the book. Number one is that James Patterson is a well-known best-selling author. So I think when we see a book written from somebody of that stature, then people are going to take that as more valid, right? And then there is a blurb, like you said in the book, where he says in there, you're the jury and all the evidence is in, but it's not, because we haven't been presented with the evidence. So therefore, in my mind, are we tainting this trial from the beginning? Because let's not forget, the defense is trying to, during the trial, do alternate perpetrators. There has been question by people who have said, what if there was somebody else? Law enforcement, through this investigation, did not, I don't believe, fully complete all searches for all suspects. It was if they found a suspect and said, well, he fits the mold. There are things that have been released to show that do tie Kohberger to the crime in itself as well. So I just feel for the case, for the legality of it, this is detrimental to it, because again, if he were not guilty, then you can't hang him to the cross at this point until we see everything. If he's considered guilty by the jury, then this would be an appeal issue. And then you're letting somebody who's guilty of this horrific crime possibly being loose in the streets. And that would not be fair to the victims at all. So I feel like we just have to be careful and cautious when putting this out, because sure, Dateline gets, all these people watching, and James Patterson's going to get all these people reading this book. But at some point, when is too much and not the right thing to do?
Again, don't feel like the timing is right. Again, I love Keith Morrison. It didn't feel like the timing was right. It felt very intentional, both the Dateline episode and then the book. And, the whole point of our podcast is to really break down the legalities and the evidence and really just all of the legal terminology and everything for people to understand and look at a case from both sides from a legal perspective, not from an opinion based. We want to look at it from the way that it's supposed to be in the court of law, which is innocent until proven guilty. And so that's why I preface by saying we are not Kohberger sympathizers. We are not Team Kohberger. We just really want a very unbiased, evidence-based podcast. We are humans and we do have opinions, and we are allowed to voice those with evidence backing those things up. And so when it comes to this type of stuff, we're just speaking on it because we just want justice for the 4 victims. It's so important. And I do believe that it's important to say, listen, we don't think that this is fair for the victims, the families, and especially every Dateline episode to release information, like of the substance of what happened to Ethan, particularly in his body, and to have that come out on a Dateline episode and not in court, and the family have to live through that every single time something like that comes out it's tough, and it's going to come out and people are going to talk about it, but at least allow the families to brace themselves and say, okay, but I don't have to think about people talking about it until court, and then these things happen. I feel like the nature of how the bodies were left is so sensitive. I think about if that was my loved one, my child, and you're hearing people essentially feel like they're gossiping about such a horrific thing that happened to your child or your family member. I just can't imagine. So it's tough. It's tough for it to come out in that way. And that's not better if it's released by the news outlets, but at least if it's there's just no good way.
Well, they are having a hearing that's scheduled for the victims to essentially go over what it's going to look like for them through this trial. And I think part of that is to prepare them for photos that are going to be shown in court, information like you had mentioned about what had happened to Ethan with the carving in his leg, etc. That type of information, as it is disseminated through the trial, it can be protected. Like we're seeing in Karen Reed, the news organizations that have the live feed there, they're not showing these photos on TV. If you're in the courtroom, of course, you see them. We see in the Diddy trial, how they're actually putting up screens and protecting information from being, widely publicized for people to actually be able to view and see. So this does not allow them that opportunity to do that when we have information that comes out that should not be until that point. Because like you said, these are very sensitive things. So it'll be interesting to see what the judge is going to do with this, because this judge is a stickler, and I feel like he's going to do the right thing for the case because it's only fair for the victims.
Yeah.
I have a feeling he's going to grant the continuance.
Yeah.
But if he feels like the defense has had ample time to do that, because there are guidelines and timelines that they have to go by, to, review evidence, and that they have had enough time, then he's going to say, you really have had way more time than you need to. We're not going to afford you any additional time, and the trial is going to continue. So
yeah, it's really up to the judge. He's a bit of a stickler, like you said, so it's hard to say if he's going to lean one way or the other. However, I agree. I do believe, I think the judge is really upset about the Dateline thing.
I think the Dateline, if we get a continuance, if Dateline did it in. I'm sorry, Keith Morrison, but Dateline did it in.
I'm such a fan.
Gosh.
But truly, I think seeing how fed up with the Dateline episode the judge was, and then now the defense coming out, because now there's this book that's being released, 16 days before the trial. So between the Dateline episode and the book, I do believe that the judge may side with the defense on this one and say, okay, you guys can have more time. Do you think that we will see trial in 2025 if they delay it?
No, I don't. I think it'll go into 2026.
I think so.
Yeah.
Maybe spring of 2026.
Which is so hard for the victims and their families, because they're now gearing up for this to start July 30th, and now it's going to be prolonged. So it's really hard for them. The other thing is, the longer the trial goes, before it starts, then we risk more information being put out, because it feels like a documentary here, another documentary, another book, another article, more speculation. So then
the more time that goes on, the more that people can fill in those little gaps and those little pockets, and put doubt in the minds and information in people's minds. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the judge does. Did the judge say when he's making the ruling?
No.
I didn't think so.
No. Yeah. So we will keep you guys updated to let you know what the status of that is. Yeah. Probably as soon as it comes in, because I think this is such an important.
We'll do an emergency
episode. I know.
We'll get it
out. Drop over out. We're in the middle of Target. Hello. Guess.
Gotta go. So
that's probably where you'd find me. Target.
Truly.
We live either that or the coffee shop.
Yes, the couches and the beds they have in Target is really for us.
Yes, that's right. They're on display for us. We're pretty guilty, but yeah.
All right. Well, that is all we have for this episode. We do have Karen Reed, Diddy coming up as well. So definitely strap in for all things. We're trying to stay consistent and get it all out for you guys. So thank you so much for continuing to support our podcast and watch. And thank you so much for the love always. Tune into our next episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Comment down below your thoughts on the Dateline episode, the book. When do you think trial is going to be? Your thoughts?
Think it's going to get continued?
Yeah. What do you think the vibes are?
Yeah.
So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Have a blessed rest of your week.
Yes, absolutely.
And we'll see you in the next one.